It's time to talk about shitty video games. For this list, we're not going to be doing easy targets like shovelware or kids games, and it has to have been released in 2019. I also want to mention that this list is going to start out with games that are still somewhat enjoyable, and it's going to pretty much go downhill from there until it's absolute misery. No mercy, no more preamble, let's start it off with Gears 5. Now you might think I'm being too harsh, putting this game up here, but no, it deserves it. Gears 5 is not as close to as bad or unpolished as some of the other games on this list, and it improves over Gears 4, but that's not hard to do. Microwave dog shit is better than Gears 4. A nutless monkey could make a better game than Gears 4. I had very low expectations for Gears 5, and they were shattered with this game's opening hours. In a good way. It really seemed like Gears of War was going to see a return to form and come back to its glory days for a brief moment. Then, once the prologue was over, I was immediately dragged out of having fun, playing a different character I didn't care about the entire game while being put through about 7 or 8 hours worth of dull gameplay, repetitive open world traveling, and eardrum-rapingly annoying dialogue before the game decided to end with a cliffhanger, just like its predecessor. Gears of War 4 may have been grating at times, but there were slivers of fun throughout the gameplay and had a decent opening as well. Gears 5 starts out great, but doesn't end as strong, leaving about 7 or 8 hours revolving around traveling around 2 empty open worlds. These open worlds are the worst part of the game. They just feel like padding, or a shallow feature on the back of the box to sell copies to people who only play open world games. As if this shoehorned feature can get people like that to even consider playing a Gears game. Can someone explain to me why the idiots at Microsoft and the Coalition thought this would be a good idea to take a game franchise based on tightly designed, smaller maps, pacing, and enemy placement in favor of gameplay where you spend most of the time traveling empty worlds with almost nothing to do in them other than pointless, boring side missions and picking up shitty collectibles. All the while characters yammer poorly written, forced, awkward, lol so quirky dialogue, almost as bad and as frequent as Gears 4. Who the fuck actually finds any of this dialogue funny? No, seriously, who the hell thinks that what they're saying in this game is actually funny? Never have kids if you think this is funny. There were also the lies about the PC port, because of course there were. How there was going to be split-screen co-op for the new escape mode. That's only in the Xbox One version, as is the split-screen multiplayer, but you can play the shallow campaign in local co-op. Great. I had little expectations for the Gears series after 4, and after playing 5, I'm left with even lower ones. The game started fun, but that's its biggest insult. I had fun for almost 2 hours, only to be torn away from it. It's one thing to make a mediocre, disappointing game, but the fact that you've not only lied about the PC version, not made amends for it, you've made this opening level that seems so good, and tore me away from it, and to make the exact same mistakes as your predecessor just sings to me that Gears 5 is not only a bad game, but one of the worst 2019 has to offer. Also, the game's multiplayer is a dying microtransaction-riddled mess, if you wanted to know about that. Coming in at number 4, we have Metal Wolf Chaos XD. Great title, guys. There have been plenty of remasters in 2019, but nothing more nonsensical and unnecessary as this game. Beyond the recent press, notably at E3 2018, I'm sure most of you, myself included, never even heard of this game. It came out in Japan only, it didn't sell well, and to make it worse, it was released on the original Xbox, a region-locked console, so it really fell into obscurity. Fast forward over a decade later, and publisher Devolver Digital and developer General Arcade decide to bring this game to the masses. Now, when it comes to remastering a game, there's some expectations, like instead of just emulating it as is, warts and all, it should have some quality of life features. It should have some extra content if possible. Isn't that the point of, in the game's description, a modernized re-release? Well, modernized versions of games aren't locked to 30 frames per second. Modernized versions don't have horribly compressed audio. Modernized versions on PC don't have bare-bones options and minimal quality of life features. At least that's the expectation I have. Otherwise, I just emulate, or in this case, mod an Xbox, which I have. These issues aside, Metal Wolf Chaos just isn't that fun to play. You don't feel like you're piloting a badass mech, and it just controls sluggish, and your weapons just have this hollow feeling to them. And that's primarily because of the poor sound design. Particularly, the shotgun sounds like absolute ass. Despite having a fun premise for the time, it's now competing in a more crowded market with games like Saints Row 4 and Metal Gear Rising beating it out in terms of political satire. There aren't a whole lot of single-player mech games nowadays, but at this point you could drop a turd and call it a mech game, and people would still buy it because there aren't many alternatives. It just rattles my brain when I just think about the process of re-releasing and marketing a game like this. You have a game no one has heard of, wasn't like that much in the country it was released in, nor was accessible to play outside of the country. Then you painstakingly do the hardest part, which is acquire the rights and bring it to modern platforms, only to not put any effort into fixing the problems it had in the first place. I mean, you're dumping money and time into getting it working in the first place and marketing it, so fixing and tweaking its problems should be the easy part. The remake, in all honesty, shouldn't have even been made. It deserves the award for the most pointless remaster of the year, and as such, it deserves number 4 on this list. What a complete joke. Coming in at number 3, we have Daymare 1998. Daymare is an awkward, half-baked, narrative-driven survival horror shooter that started as a fan remake of Resident Evil 2. But when you look at what that game actually was, a half-baked, Unreal Engine, Unity, proof-of-concept kind of game, you see the resemblance. Now you might say I'm sounding pretty harsh because it's a smaller team of developers, but no, I'm not going to go easy on them. At the end of the day, they have a publisher and are charging for this game. This game has so many problems. Everything regarding the story ranges from underwhelming to awful. Dialogue delivery is generally pretty bad. The script sucks. It sounds like it was written by some high schoolers in a day. The story itself is a constantly shifting mess with characters you don't care about. This is not to mention the gameplay. The opening actually is kinda decent, but it only goes downhill from there as you're thrown into highly linear areas sometimes. I'm talking suburban areas set up like literal alleyways. The gunplay is actually decent and some of the mechanics are pretty neat, but they are almost completely ruined by the game's awkward controls. Now, I'm actually one of the few critics of this game that didn't think the mechanics and controls were that bad, but it's a big point of contention with many critics on Steam, especially with our in-house reviewer Joseph, who played this game with me. Joseph, what did you think of the controls in Daymare?
It's fucking stupid. I have a button, and they're telling me to press it multiple times. Why the hell would I press it multiple times? I pressed it once. Am I coding the game for you? Are you this fucking stupid? Let me click it once and reload. I tapped it, it didn't fucking reload. Fix your fucking game, dumbass. Fuck you mean tap R. End.
Rant aside, this is on top of the mysteriously inflated Day 1 user Metacritic scores where the game had dozens of 9s and perfect 10s from people who didn't exactly speak English well, nor had any other games reviewed on their accounts, and they seemed to be fresh too. Now, of course, this is all speculation, but in addition to this, I want to also mention that the developers repeatedly stated they couldn't add in features like rebindable keys, which of course they eventually did do after people complained enough. The game already had so many technical issues, and for the developers to take your money, say things like, "We can't do it," and then have all these shady reviews pop up, just tells me that there was a genuine lack of talent and effort put into this game, and money was thrown in at every crevice in an attempt to smooth sales out. You can't fix a game with money alone. You need skill and time, and Daymare needed a lot more of both. A damn shame because there was some potential here. A hardcore Resident Evil style survival horror game where you play as the bad guy? Fucking cool idea. Ruined by execution though. A complete waste. Coming in at number 2, we have Senran Kagura Reflections for PC. God damn it. Reflections came out for PC earlier this year, right before a Steam sale. Now that's a bad sign already, but it gets a lot worse. Originally released on the Nintendo Switch and panned for its bare-bones content and lackluster interactivity, Senran Kagura Reflections finally comes out on PC with bare-bones content and lackluster interactivity. Actually worse than the Nintendo Switch version. The game costs $10, which includes just one character to romance, which can be completed in less than an hour in one of the dullest interactive visual novels I've ever seen. Seriously, pornographic flash games from the late 2000s have more interactivity than this. It was originally designed for the HD Rumble functionality featured in the Joy-Cons on the Switch. Rumble has been stripped out of the PC version, even when using a controller, making this version feel gimped and incredibly overpriced without any worthwhile bonus content to make up for it, all the while being a late port. Speaking of DLC, there's about $100 worth. Entire characters cost the price of the game, so that's $10 for the game, $10 for an additional character, which is, again, less than an hour of content. The writing and the character selection is also incredibly lazy and shallow, with characters from the franchise that have more passive personalities. Rather than making a more interesting visual novel-style game utilizing the game's strengths, such as a cast of varying personalities and characters, we're stuck with these characters that have been seemingly stripped down, and not in the good way. Reflections is not just lazy, it's expensively lazy. I expect something like this on iOS or Android with companies like Activision or EA pushing these horrendous microtransactions, but I guess publisher Marvelous really couldn't help themselves here. The creative talent from the franchise has already been leaving or is currently leaving, and with Senran Kagura 7 looking like it's turning into vaporware with constant changes and rewrites due to censorship, it seems that this franchise is completely doomed, and the last memories of it we will have will be 2 spin-offs. One mediocre, Peach Ball, and one god-awful, Reflections. What's truly sad is that this franchise won't die because of incompetence or financial failures. It'll die from sheer fucking laziness. The only redeeming factor this game has is that it's really entertaining to play if you do it with the right group of people.
Like Scoob, she's got a major cooch boner right here. Aaron needs to take you somewhere. He's getting irritated. Aaron, do you like the game?
He's like, I'm not entertained by this weird shit.
Are you trying to choke her out? There you go. Hold on. This is the best part. This is it.
Holy shit!
What's happening?
What the fuck? Oh my
This is a weird
god!
fucking game.
This just escalated.
It's getting pretty good.
Why?
It's about to get good.
Oh my god!
Jake,
You're making her beat!
that sounds like popping bubble wrap.
Now for the final game. Joseph, what's the final game?
Monkey King.
Monkey King?
Monkey King.
Monkey King, Hero is Back. What even is that title? This game really flew under the radar, and thank God it did. Have you ever played a game where within the first 5 seconds of gameplay you can immediately tell it's going to be awful? I'm not talking about just the graphics, by the way. Monkey King is a character action game. A bad one. Attacks, while sometimes animated well, are clunky and slow with tons of input delay between attacks. Enemy variety is literally just recolored enemies that do slightly different attacks. Enemy design is also weak, they look like fucking boglins. And even if all that was at least decent, the gameplay at its core is just a brainless button masher. And the worst thing about this game, the absolute worst, is the sound and cinematic design. I've replayed the first part of the game to show you how many times I've skipped every cutscene. There's just so much thrown at you, and what's worse is that it's all pointless or annoying, which leads me to the sound design, which, as I've said before, is god-awful. The cinematic design can be passed off as padding, and you can at least skip it, but the sound design, as I've said before, is horrible, so let me say it again, it's fucking horrible. Daymare's voice acting was bad, but not annoying with a few exceptions. The little boy in this game will not shut up and constantly talks your ear off.
This way, Dashong! Hey! Over here, Dashong! I'm Lua, and this is... It's, Anand!
The other character performances are pretty bad too. The game also had no shortage of technical issues at launch. Firstly, the game's language was stuck on Chinese, even though it's got an English dub, and was released on the American Steam store page. The game was locked at 30 FPS and would crash for a lot of people. Now, to the developer's credit, they fixed most of these problems, but not until months later. Polish a turd and you still got a turd. It's still littered with loading screens, and as previously mentioned, it doesn't look good too. It looks like a PS2 game you'd see in an HD collection on PS3. Now, what really gets me is that this game is based on a Chinese film that came out 4 years ago, so it's a movie tie-in game of a movie from 2015. There was a Terminator film out this year, and its tie-in game Terminator Resistance has more polish and creativity in one exoskeletal finger than this game has in its whole waste of 17 gigabytes of space on my hard drive. It's also almost as expensive as Terminator Resistance. Yeah, you heard that right. Monkey King Heroes Back wants, stupid fucking title, wants $35 upfront on top of a $30 season pass. So if you want everything, it's going to run you $60, full price. Where Gears 5 was sold at full price, it was at least giving you a lot of content mixed in quality as it was. Metal Wolf Chaos is a port of an older title that at least has some entertainment value through its humor. Daymare could at least be somewhat forgivable because of its roots, and was kind of fun at the beginning. And Reflections is bare bones, but still cheap, and entertaining, of course, with the right people. Monkey King has absolutely no redeemable gameplay from just the brief time I played it for, despite it being an already short game. I'm serious, I tried to sit my ass down and play it, but I couldn't even muster in more than an hour at a time. I was so unbelievably bored. The gameplay is just so amateur, so simplistic. I even tried to trick my friends into playing it so that I wouldn't have to. They couldn't even sit through it. There is some effort put into things like the animations, but to ask so much for so little is so insulting. It's so awful to play. It feels like torture, and for that reason, it deserves, this literal Who game broke me. It deserves the 2019 Worst Game of the Year spot. Well, there you have it, the worst of 2019. Honestly, not that bad. I mean, there were no Ride to Hell Retributions this year, there weren't any Rambo the video games this year, there weren't any Air Controls, which is pretty great. It's been a year of disappointments, I'd say. A bunch of disappointments that also happen to be kind of bad. Now, if you want to see some good games, well, you can check out the top 5 of 2019. I actually have some really good recommendations, some games you probably don't see on everyone's list. I'm not trying to be a hipster right here, or a contrarian, but I liked some games that were not on a whole lot of lists this year, which is, makes me feel extra special. Anyway, guys, Happy New Year. Sorry this video was so late. I had some complications come up, but anyway, guys, I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. I'm out.